Hi, folks. I hope everyone is having a good first day of distance learning, as it were. Um, this video is for English 1302. I'm going to take this opportunity to help you kind of map out your argumentation essay and use the outline that I have online as the principal method for doing that. Again, as with anything else that I put online for you, it's generally meant as a guideline. You can alter this, you can go in different directions, so long as you are essentially making an argument. I also would refer you back to the piece that I showed you earlier in the semester, how not to make your essay boring as hell. And I could actually do another video where I go back over that with you. Never fear, this video is not just going to consist of this desktop screen. So let's take a look here at our Blackboard. So the piece that I'm going to be working from is this piece right here, argument essay sample outline. I'm just going to click over and I'm going to go through some of this with you. I really encourage you, after watching this video, to really read through this outline. It gives you a lot of really nice advice in terms of how to go about crafting your essay, some of the thought processes that you want to engage in, and so on. Okay, and I'm just going to go through some of this and kind of give my insight into it. One thing I do want to clarify, in case any of you are wondering. So a number of your instructors are engaging in distance learning in different ways. I am doing what's referred to sort of in pedagogy jargon as asynchronous learning, meaning that I am not requiring you to log in at any particular time, and so on. Some professors may be electing to have you log on during your usual class time and so on and so forth. I am not doing that for the various reasons that I outlined in my previous announcement and video. Okay, so just in case you're wondering, I'm not having you do that. So turning in materials, submitting materials is twofold now in terms of the value. It counts, of course, for submitting materials, which of course indicates labor in the course, and we've been through all of that and the implications thereof previously. It also now doubles as attendance. Okay, so I'm not, expecting you to log on at a certain time to get attendance and all of that kind of stuff. Okay. So, looking at this argument, of course, your first couple of paragraphs are going to be your introduction. In essence, first thing is, what are you arguing? What exactly, is your thesis, your argument, and so on, right? With that, depending on what you're writing about and so forth, you want to include some background information, how you got there, kind of what just a brief statement of essentially what underlies the issue. Okay, it's, again, the main thing about your introductory paragraph is that you want to clearly, somewhere in your introductory paragraph, you want to have a clearly stated thesis. And again, if you remember in my previous lecture, previous discussion that we had in class, actually a couple of times prior to spring break. Thesis is derived from the same root as theory. In other words, you don't have a thesis unless you have something that can be a statement that can be supported or refuted, right? So, for instance, if I were to say people in various cities across the United States reacted to the news of COVID-19 by hoarding toilet paper. Okay, that is not a thesis, right? That is an observation. If I were to say the reaction of hoarding toilet paper in response to COVID-19 is short-sighted and irresponsible, that would be a thesis, right? Because then you could construct an essay such that you could define essentially the parameters of what short-sighted and irresponsible are, and then you could show how that particular behavior falls into that, right? So that then is a thesis because you would have to support it, okay? And again, this is saying here, if you look up the top of the screen here, nope, hold on. If you're arguing about an issue or theory, provide a brief explanation of your issue or theory, right? In other words, just in brief, right? What's the rationale behind your theory or your thesis, right? What's your strategy for arguing your thesis, in other words? Again, you may want to follow that up with additional background surrounding the issue. Again, this depends entirely, right, upon who your audience is, right? What their previous understanding or knowledge is of the subject and what they need to know. Now, one can assume that perhaps if you have been, you've already written your report and so on and so forth, if that's the same audience and the person has already, the audience has already read your report, you can perhaps assume that they already know then the terms that you define specifically in your report, right? So you won't need to rehash that particular ground, okay? But if there's something else, if there's a key element that you want to emphasize, right, then you can do that there. Now, the reason that I have included this outline, or that I'm drawing this outline to your attention, is because of the detail that it goes into with the supporting evidence paragraphs. Basically, for each of the major points that you're trying to argue, you're going to want to have one or more supporting evidence paragraphs. The main key point here, right, is that for everything that you are arguing, you've got to state your claim, or your statement that supports your claim, right? Supports the main claim or your main thesis, right? Then you have to provide the evidence, integrating the evidence with signal phrases, running acknowledgments, and that material that we've discussed previously, right? Then you want to explain the evidence, and the explanation of the evidence is key, right? If you don't explain the evidence, it's as if you didn't include the evidence at all, right? The importance here, the real genesis here, right, is the relationship or the interplay between the statement, the statement of claim, right, or this is saying topic sentence, right? the relationship between the topic sentence, the evidence, and the explanation of the evidence, the way that gels together, the synchronicity of that is very important here. Where you, and I've stated this in class, right? Where you shine as an essayist is in your capacity to explain the relationship between the evidence and the point that you are trying to make, right? That is what you have to do every time you introduce evidence. And again, remember, in terms of documentation, you have to document in text, i.e., parenthetical in-text citation, and using whatever system you're using, each time you paraphrase, summarize, or quote directly. Right? And remember that direct quoting is only explicitly necessary. You can do it. You can do it in other instances, but it's only explicitly necessary when the language of the quote has bearing on the meaning or significance of the quote as it relates to the point that you're trying to make. In that case, direct quotation is actually needed. The example that I gave in class, of course, one of them was, I did not have sex with that woman, the famous or infamous statement by Bill Clinton, and the operative term there would be sex. And of course, for people of my generation, the whole debate about whether Clinton perjured himself or didn't perjure himself by what Clinton meant by sex versus what his audience, i.e. the majority of the United States, assumed he meant by sex, and so on and so forth, right? So in other words, the word, the language was significant. So it bared direct quoting, and that's of course just one minor example, but you get the idea. There's a couple other points I want to bring up here. Note too that, as I just brought up to the top of the screen, you can have, and you should have, more than one supporting evidence paragraph if you're following this model. Okay, so if you're writing a 3-page paper, for example, 3 to 5 page paper, which is generally the length that we're aiming for with this, you're going to have 2-3 supporting paragraphs. Okay, one thing I want to call your attention to, because we really didn't have much of an opportunity to discuss concession and counter argument prior to spring break, but I really want to call your attention to this because it's a very important concept in terms of both philosophically and strategically when talking about argumentation and rhetoric. So the idea of counter-argument as it goes with writing, okay? This draws upon the teachings or the techniques, if you will, of a psychologist, actually, Carl Rogers, who after World War II really began to think and really kind of came to the conclusion that one of the problems that we have in Western society, and particularly in American society, is that we deem argument as war. That's our prevailing metaphor for argument. So that when we're arguing with one another, it becomes something like the dozens. Well, yo mama did this, yo mama did that, and so on and so forth, and nobody really hears one another, right? So because in the metaphor of the argument is war, we're simply just firing volleys, rhetorical volleys at one another and trying to metaphorically kill the other person, right? just like in hip hop, the artist talks about murdering somebody and so forth. Well, that's not necessarily for real, literal. That's metaphorical. He's gonna murder him in the rap battle or what have you. Let's hope it's not for real. Although now you've got artists, who are YouTube famous who have in fact murdered a lot of folk. But anyway, the point being, right, that when we frame anything as war, this is the possibility of what can happen. But Roger said, what if we return to a much older and classical definition of argument or view of argument, where we look at argument as conversation? In other words, the goal of argument is not to defeat one's opponent per se, but rather to reach an understanding. So to do this, one of the key points is that you have to, or one should, acknowledge one's opponent, if you will, or somebody on the other side of the argument. You have to acknowledge that they are thinking, feeling, valid human beings. So what he comes up with, or what he didn't really come up with it, but what he champions is process of concession and counter-argument. In other words, you can make a concession to the other side, right? But then you come back and you show how your side actually, in effect, deals with the issue brought up in the concession better than the other side, right? So you acknowledge somebody's point, the validity of somebody's point, but then you actually come in and you say, my position deals with this, and here's how, right? My position actually addresses this, and here's how. Or conversely, you can say, this is a valid point, but here's why my position is more important than this, right? The import of what you're arguing is graver than say what the other person is doing. So, for example, see, what's a good example? One could say mandatory shelter in place places undue stress on families with economic challenges, child care challenges, etc. But the risk of infecting a majority of the population or a significant portion of the population, I think the projected number is somewhere around, if sheltering in place was not implemented, the projected number is like a third. So but you could say, but potentially infecting a third of the population with COVID-19 outweighs these inconveniences, right? It's because, we all hope, and everything points to our social distancing / shelter in place and so forth. We all hope, and everything points to that being temporary, right? So temporary inconvenience is supplanted, right, or overshadowed by the need to potentially save lives and not to tax our system and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's kind of a convoluted explanation, but on the fly explanation, of course. So it's not that much different than class, honestly. But anyway, this area here, again, review this and really try to use this technique in your work, because it is a technique of finesse, right? And finesse is preferable, right? Okay. And then talking about conclusion. Honestly, and again, I would recommend that you read this advice here about conclusions. I'm not going to go through it verbatim because, well, you all can read. But the main point that it's trying to get across is that you don't just crap back out your thesis statement as your conclusion. Okay. Why? Because that's tedious and boring. And boredom is the bane, right, of your reader. The last thing you want to do is bore your reader, have your reader lose interest, and so on and so forth. What you want to do in your conclusion is you want to remind the reader why they're there, right? What why you've taken them on this journey through your paper. You could give them talk about actions that they may take in response to what you've written. You could point them to additional resources, and so on and so forth. Okay, but please read through these bullet points, and it will give you, my hope is, and I'm 99% sure that it will give you some fuel for a more robust type of conclusion. Okay, I thank you very much. My next couple of videos will be looking at in greater depth the some of the sample essays that I have for the argumentation paper. Please feel free to shoot me emails as you need. Again, I'll be posting additional ways for you to contact me over the next couple of days. I really applaud those of you who have reached out to me today. I've gotten 2 or 3 emails, actually 3 or 4 emails over the past day or so, and I've tried to respond to those as quickly as I can. I've gotten a couple comments in the comments section of the videos. That's always nice too. But I am here for you as best I can be, and I'm actually positive that we can have a really great experience engaging with writing and engaging with these techniques and working together, even if it is asynchronous, and even if it's through distance learning. I have taught this class online before. I've had students in Kuwait. I've had high school students. I've had students in really remote areas that they didn't have anybody else qualified to teach it, so they essentially partnered with the school that I was working for, and so on and so forth. And it's worked well in the past. It's just a different way of approaching it, and I think you'll find for some of you it's going to work very well. You just kind of have to pace yourself. Okay, and again, I do want to emphasize that if you want to remain with the partnerships for this project, please let me know via email by the end of the week, by Friday the 27th. Okay, one group already has, and I've responded to them. You're not obligated to remain in the partnerships, but if you want to, I want to be aware of it so that I know kind of what to expect, and we can move on from there. Okay, as I am likely to do, I've kind of been carrying on a little bit too much, so I'm going to sign off on this video. Remember, this first draft of the argument is due either individual or group. is due the 11th of April. Again, I'm going to post more videos with examples and so on and so forth. You can have plenty of time to ask questions. Okay, have a great day. Thank you so much.